Welcome, Buff fans. Adam and I are getting together here later on. I guess the signing period is it over yet? It's a little after 5 o'clock on Friday. Is the
This
signing
is
period?
about this is about a year ago when Jordan Seaton sent in his letter of intent. It's not the letter of intent anymore, but you still
Yeah,
sign financial paperwork, which is pretty similar to the old way of doing things. But yeah, no, it's I think we're safe to do this video. I don't know if there's
yeah,
anything. It's kind of this very short period of time in which you can kind of catch your breath.
yeah,
And then Monday, the transfer portal opens, and actually, there's already some stuff kind of slowly tricking in terms of that stuff too.
yeah.
Colorado's going to host a Liberty offensive line transfer, one of the best interior offensive linemen according to PFF this past season on a visit. So even that stuff is starting to kind of pick up a little bit. So there really is no slow time now, I guess, but you can at least exhale a little bit, I guess.
Well, and yeah, you talk about not even a slow time. I mean, there's been some news trickling out today of some current Buffs that are planning to enter the portal. Such as Cordell Russell, Morgan Pearson, a couple other guys as well. Right? I can't remember off the top of my head who a couple of the other guys are, but some guys that didn't really play this year that are entering the
Walter
portal.
Taylor as well.
Oh, okay. I didn't see Walter Taylor.
The
Um,
other day. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, that those don't surprise you. When guys didn't
yeah.
play. I mean, Walter Taylor really not a surprise because he never even dressed. I don't think this year, so he was pretty far down the depth chart. But yeah, we're starting to see those things. But again, the recruiting calendar changes every year, and you and I talk about this. That for you especially, who covers this stuff, this has just got to be mind numbing. To like every year, you have no idea. Okay, what's the recruiting calendar going to look like this year? And this year, obviously, it's signing day is about 2 or 3 weeks sooner than it usually is. How did you handle it? I mean, did you feel like you handled it okay? I mean, it was about 4 days after the last game you covered.
Well, one thing that helps is Coach Prime and his staff do the quality over quantity approach with high school
Right.
recruiting. So you're not dealing. If I had TCU's class, was I think they signed 30 guys.
Yeah.
That would have been pretty tough to fully grasp all 30 guys and feel like when you talk about them, you're going beyond just a bio. So that part of it makes it a little bit easier. But a lot of these guys have been committed for a while too, so you kind of know what's coming. And yeah, no, it was a really good class too, which the only thing that I think you could say is a negative is just the presents arrived early, right?
Yeah.
If you have any issues with Colorado's high school class, then you're just not well in tune with the way they recruit and how good of a class it is. It's the best in the Big 12,
Hmm.
and it's a top 25 class nationally in terms of average rating, which is more important than your overall rating. Again, if you sign 30 guys, you kind of get credit for more, which is to me, especially the way that Coach Prime breaks it down of how many of those guys are going to be in the portal by next spring.
Right.
That part of it makes it kind of archaic the way that all of us do it with our recruiting rankings. We should update that a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's not really CU. It's not just CU. I mean, there's a lot of schools that they're starting, especially with CU success. I think they're going to start to maybe look at that a little more, this model. But we've seen teams that they might only have a 14, 15 to 20 player class, and then you're going to have those that go 30. And so the ones that go 30, yeah, they're going to be ranked higher because you have more numbers. But yeah, CU's average star rating or average player ranking is the best on 247, and so that's exciting. I mean, it's a really good class, and every one of these guys, the 14 that signed, were committed. Going into signing day, right? And so, and there was another one that was committed. Alex Graham chose to go to USC, but you had been forecasting that leading up to that anyway. So, in talking to you a little bit that day, or messaging you that day, you weren't really surprised by a whole lot on signing day.
No, they took some swings, and that this is big boy recruiting, but you're kind of the way you're going at it with the way that Colorado attacks the portal is you're recruiting for wants, not for
Yeah.
needs
Hmm.
from the high school ranks. And so uh, you get a guy that's a blue chip recruit on the hook, and if he goes somewhere else, you just fill it by a more experienced guy in the portal.
Yeah,
So,
right.
there's really no downside to shooting for guys like NOB or Michael Carroll. You want to take those swings because even if it doesn't work out, you're going to be just fine. And then you are able to flip somebody like London Merritt from Ohio State,
Yep.
and it's half the class that they flipped from another school. And even that other half that was not committed to other schools, a lot of them, like Chauncey Gooden, very early were like a Clemson lock. And you go down the
Mhm.
list, all these guys were projected to go other places. And so Colorado winning 9 games and having Coach Prime as a presence at the head of the table, and the way that they recruit, Brian, is really impressive to me. It is all hands on deck.
Yeah.
It's not this is your recruit, it's our recruit. And
Hmm.
so they have a great strategy there. And so being able to put this class together, whereas again you go down the list and you'd say this guy was slated to go here, he was slated to go there, but they're all buffs now.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about in the past, and you've covered it more closely than I have over the years. But I think about the past, and I tweeted this on Thanksgiving night when those four guys went on nightcap with Shannon Sharp and committed. That I remember the days when the Buffs were flipping guys from G5 schools, and it was like, oh, nice, they got that guy who has been committed to San Jose State or whatever, and I think the way recruits talk is differently too, in that you would ask them like, okay, well, which coach did you connect with? And they would talk about, oh, it was the O-line coach or this guy here, or this guy there. Whereas now, like these guys are talking about like staff. I mean, you mentioned the whole staff. I mean, they get to know John Snelson, who's doing the creative stuff, and they build relationships with the creative team and these people that are hanging out with them doing things like that throughout their visits. So I think it's easy to see why these guys come to Boulder and they walk away saying, "Man, it just felt like a family there," because they've got a ton of people that are, pumping them up and excited to see them there.
Yeah, and when Coach Prime says he doesn't have a sales pitch, from what I've experienced from a coverage standpoint, is he's 100% correct. It's not
Yeah,
the one thing they will say is that we want you to come in and play right away. But that's
yeah,
something Coach Prime says in the press conferences in terms of their high school recruiting,
yeah.
that we're signing guys that we want to play right away. So there's when they tell recruits that, they're genuinely trying to back it up, and they have.
Right.
If you looked at the number of freshmen that have played the last couple of years under him, so the sales pitch is get to Boulder, hang out with us, and it
Hmm.
kind of makes it was kind of a joke on our message board about the whole Coach Prime not doing in-home visits crowd has gotten pretty quiet here recently, because
Yeah.
it's pretty clear that they have a way to go about it. And I think you definitely weed out young men by making them come on campus, because now it's not just okay, especially if it's an unofficial visit, they're paying their way out there. It's not
Yeah.
just a photo op with Coach Prime. It's like, okay, are you really serious about us? And if you are, we want to show you the way that they operate. That's something that London Merritt told me is, and they did this with a few guys, is kind of living a day in the life of a buff, where you come in during the week and actually kind of go through their schedule and
Mhm.
see what it's like. And it's very transparent, the way they recruit, and I think that helps because it weeds out guys before they even get on campus.
Yeah, when you mentioned the home visit thing, for some reason my mind immediately went to I don't know why I thought of this, but the story Gary Barnett and Darian Hagan used to tell of Barnett like hanging outside. I think it was Barnett and Les Miles, guys like that, hanging outside Darian Hagan's house and waiting for the Nebraska coaches to leave. And when they left, they would jump in there and then go make their pitch as well. So uh, gone are those days, at least with Colorado, where they're not doing that type of thing because they don't have to. And I wonder if there's a lot of coaches around the country that are looking at that saying, "Hmm, I kind of like that. Maybe I don't have to go all over the country going into these homes." And a couple of things with this class, Adam, and we'll get into a couple of the players, but a couple of observations I have is that you know somebody I mentioned when I was talking about the bowl game on Twitter. Somebody mentioned they want to go to the Holiday Bowl because that's great for recruiting purposes, and not anymore. I mean, California, this is the second straight class. There's not a single California guy in the class. And, you know, if this staff, you'd rather have a bowl game, you'd rather go to the Peach Bowl, or something in Texas, obviously, or Florida, because that gets you closer to the recruiting. I mean, what are your thoughts on just, California not being that hotbed anymore for Colorado?
Yeah, it doesn't concern me at all. I think the hit
Yeah.
rate on the California young men that Colorado's recruited over the past 20 years is it's not great.
Yeah.
There's been some really, really good players that have come out of there,
Hmm.
obviously, but a lot of those guys have underperformed. I'm not willing to go quite to the extreme that Colin Cowherd, I heard the other day, was talking about how a four-star recruit in California is a three-star in Texas. That's just a blanket statement. That's just stupid. Like
Yeah.
you can't say something that broad.
Hmm.
But when you're in Denver and you're just going to have guys get on a plane, uh, and from a recruiting standpoint, you recruit nationally. And when Coach
Hmm.
Prime is your head coach, you recruit nationally. And this staff has got a lot of folks that are from Texas, that are from the South, Florida, obviously with Coach Prime and some other coaches. So that's where you should. You're going to be able to relate to those young men a little bit better than the California kids. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like in-state recruiting for me is like, yeah, if you can get a talented recruit from California or Colorado, go
Hmm.
for it, but don't make that a priority. Don't feel like you have to do that.
Right. Well, and I'm not going to bag on the in-state recruits, but I mean, they did get one, Zane D'Souza. That's 2 in 3 years under Coach Prime, and this state had four Power Five or Power Four signees, and I'm looking at some of the guys the Buff signed, and they're like 4 stars, and like, oh, he's rated a top 50 player in Florida. Well, top 50 player in Colorado is going D3,
Yeah.
D2 type of guy. So it the point is, again, I'm not trying to bag on Colorado, but the talent is so deep in a Florida and Texas and really even Georgia. I mean, Georgia, as we've seen, they've made that such a priority. I know Travis grew up mainly in Florida, but he went to high school in Georgia. There's a lot of Georgia kids, in this class, and even you mentioned the hit rate on California. You look at even the recent years before Coach Prime got here, and a lot of their top players came from Texas, right? I mean, Jarek Broussard, was the offensive player of the year in the Pac-12, the pandemic year, came from Texas. Steven Montez is the all-time leading passer in CU history, came from Texas. So Laviska Shenault came from Texas. So that's been some of their best hits in recent years, even before Coach Prime.
Yeah. I, most people can't do this, but if you have the opportunity to get on a plane to just go to top level high school games,
Yeah,
and I know you spent some time covering California high school, clearly that is a massive step up from what we would typically see here. I'm telling you, you go out to Texas I've covered a lot of those All American Bowls too, and a lot of the kids that impress me in those situations are also from Texas in the South. It's just a
yeah.
different brand of football. It's more religion for them, and they just it's more uh, part of their lifestyle in terms of football, and it just is not quite the same in California anymore.
Yeah, I spent 2 football seasons in Northern California, the Sacramento area, covering high school sports, the late '90s, and I saw more talent in those 2 seasons than I saw in all the years covering Colorado. And again, I'm not trying to bag on Colorado, but like you look at the names that I covered just in those 2 years. I mean, Matt Barnes, the NBA player who longtime NBA player, is the best high school receiver I've ever seen. I mean, he was phenomenal. Ontario Smith was a running back that I got a chance to cover, and Dante Stallworth, the receiver. DJ Williams, who played linebacker for the Broncos, was the best high school running back I've ever seen, and became an NFL linebacker. So there's some pretty good talent in California. But yeah, you look at this class, and Florida, Georgia, Texas. I mean, that's a lot. Obviously, where a lot of these guys are coming from, and as we know, Coach Prime loves his Florida guys.
He should. They
Yes,
they are just built different,
yeah, they are,
Uh, yeah. So
and the Texas
I think
guys.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's the correct strategy in my opinion. But
yeah.
yeah, no, I love that Zane D'Souza committed because I got a chance to go see him play in person, and
Right.
obviously that's hard to do. I've actually tried to work that in on some road trips, Brian,
Hmm.
but it just the schedule never matches up to be able to fly out to see the recruit and then go cover a CU game. So I enjoy the local kids, and there's some great stories. The Ben Finesis, the Charlie Offerdals, Arden Walker transferring back to CU,
Yeah.
and Sam Hart transferring back to CU. And
Hmm.
so you love those in-state stories, but it's not what's going to win you championships if you get too focused in on that.
Yeah. There's one time in all these years I've traveled with CU football, 10 seasons I've traveled, that I made sure to go watch a recruit, and it was Tyler Lytle when he played for Servite High School. And at the time, he was, the highest ranked quarterback that they'd ever signed. And
Yeah.
he was committed, but he wasn't signed yet. And that was the 2016 season, and right after I saw him, I mean, they got killed, by the way. He was with Servite, but they played who's the real Bosco? Remember St. John Bosco?
Yeah.
And they had like Jacob Collier was on that team as well and sacked him once or twice. But he was on a really young team. But it was shortly after that, like he went and looked at Indiana and stuff because Steven Montez was starting to ball out a little bit. So that's the one time I went and watched a recruit on the road. So
Can I give a really bold prediction here on this analysis video, Brian?
yeah,
Julian Lewis will have a better career at CU than Tyler Lytle did.
that's a pretty bold statement. Tyler, by the way, awesome young man. I
Yeah,
got
yeah,
to know
yeah.
I got
I'm
to know
sorry.
him.
I didn't mean that as a
I
slight
know you
towards
didn't. I
him,
know you
but
didn't. I just wanted to point out, like, I got to know him and his dad a little bit. Great people, and he went off. Poor kid. He went off to UMass and he got beat up there. His very first game became the starting quarterback, and I think they played Pitt or something like that, and he got beat up. Then broke a finger or something like that his first game. But super smart kid. He's going to do just fine because he's got really nice degrees. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I agree with you. Juju Lewis probably going to have a better career because he'll be the start. I imagine he'll be the starter day one, which Tyler was not. But what are your other observations of this class? Because just in general, not necessarily players yet, but like any observations you have on what they signed on Wednesday.
Couple guys on the offensive line that
Hmm.
you don't want to do the Jordan Seaton expectation for all these guys because
Yeah,
he's pretty special. But with Chauncey Gooden, you've got a guy that I think can come in and, kind of push for some early playing time. He is so dominant in the run game.
yeah,
And we all know that next year, no matter how great Julian Lewis proves to be from day one at CU, you got to get that ground game going. And I look at a guy like Chauncey Gooden as being a road grader at guard. Carday Smith, uh, maybe it takes a year, but he has got a frame that is going to fill out real quick, and
yeah.
he's going to look like an NFL right tackle before too long. And so a couple of those guys in the offensive line really stand out just in terms of being ready to go. You said don't go with specific players, and I just did that, but that is like
Yeah.
the main takeaway that I would have from this class. It just Colorado doesn't get guys like that, and now they're doing it on a regular basis.
I'm okay with you going with players. So is that was kind of the main takeaway I had from this class was that three offensive linemen, two tight ends. Out of the 14 guys, more than a third of them are basically up front guys that I think there's going to be a little bit more of an emphasis on running the football. And you mentioned Gooden, 6'3", 360. He should be a road grader, right? And Cardi Smith, let's see, how big is he?
About
6'5",
290.
290? Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the other one is Jay Gardenhire, 6'8", 330. And
But
then you got
he's pretty raw though. He
yeah,
played basketball and got kind of a late start on football. So
yeah.
I think it would be unfair to him, honestly. And maybe he shows up with the mindset that he's just going to prove people wrong, and that would be great. But maybe a year just to kind of get the technique of everything down.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect all those three guys to start. It's just more of they're getting some big guys. That's kind of the mentality. And then a couple of tight ends, obviously. We mentioned D'Souza and then Corbin Leisure. So I think there's gonna be a little bit. I like the emphasis in the trenches on offense. Honestly, that's something they want to do. No running backs in this class. I would imagine that's going to be a portal thing that they do. But then three young receivers out of Texas, and they've had success with Texas receivers, and so not a bad thing to get three of those guys. And well, I'll ask you player wise, who player wise kind of stands out to you besides Juju? He's the obvious one.
Well, it sounds like Quentin Gibson is everybody's sleeper in this class.
Yeah,
He is just the guy that you turn on his film and you're like, wow, okay, that's LeJontay Wester playing high school football right now.
yeah,
So I see him coming in playing early. Uh, Farrakhan Jr. could probably play early as a slot receiver. Adrian and Wilson, he's got big playability as well. It just
Yeah.
yeah. And those are guys that we've seen with Draylon Miller this year. Is even if you're not a starter, if you're really talented as a wide receiver coming in, they'll find a role for you.
Hmm.
So those would be guys that I could see all getting on the field next year if they show up and they're ready to go. And I kind of throw a signee from last year into this group, and that's Cam Michael because he
Yeah.
was hurt all
Hmm.
fall.
Yep.
People are going to forget about him, and he's going to come out when he gets healthy and ball out, and people are going to go, "Oh yeah, Cam Michael's still on this roster too."
Right.
So that's a guy that with those three incoming guys, and you've already got Cam Michael in the fold and Jalen Miller coming back. We'll see when Omari and Miller gets fully healthy, but you've got a young nucleus there for sure.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to talk to Quentin Gibson?
Briefly, yes.
Okay. I'm what's his story as far as like obviously he was a late bloomer. I think he got his first offer late April from Army, and he's got almost 30 offers at this point, and everybody wants him now. I mean he's had a monster senior year. What's his story is like why he was such a late bloomer?
It's his size.
Yeah.
I think when you're what 5'8", 165, 170, he really just blew up this year.
Yeah.
And so I think that was part of it. But uh, and you, especially for Colorado, if you're recruiting, you're like you see what a guy like LeJontay Wester can do, and you go,
Yeah.
well, we're losing that. It'd
Yeah.
be nice to try to fill that void with another guy that can do some of those similar things. So for in terms of those other schools, I think it was probably size, and for Colorado, it was they're very selective with recruiting. They don't just throw out a bunch of offers, and so
Yeah.
there were you know probably a dozen offers that went out this fall, and they landed a lot of those guys. Yeah, again,
Yeah.
going to some of those guys that were committed to other schools as well, like an Alexander McPherson. I just it's great that there's still an opportunity for somebody to be a late bloomer because this whole process has become so accelerated. That a lot of guys that do blow up late sometimes do go under the radar, but for Quentin Gibson to get, I think it was like 25 offers in two
Yeah.
months, is pretty incredible.
And I think it was I think you were reporting this on your site that they had to hold off a late push from TCU, is it? Like the last
Yeah.
minute, last 24 hours or so?
He actually took a visit to TCU last weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there was some, yeah, TCU put together a good class. It's not as good as Colorado's, especially when you look at it being more quantity over quality, unlike
Yeah.
CU.
Hmm.
They got a little NIL money that they're playing with down there.
Yeah. So how about on the defensive side? Anybody excite you on that class? It's a smaller group, six guys on defense. Who kind of stands out for you on that side of the ball?
It just, if you haven't done it, throw on London Merritt's highlight reel
Yeah.
because that dude's got violent hands. He's he's versatile. He's gonna play next year for Colorado. I'd be surprised if he didn't. Smaller on the defensive side of things. I think Antonio Branch is an intriguing guy. Once his frame fills out a little bit at
Hmm.
Miami Northwestern, they use him all over the place. He is just a baller. He's going to be a stud on special teams from day one. And then Alexander McPherson, I said this on our Buffum Update show with Chico, is like you could just say this dude led IMG Academy in sacks and tackles last season and just kind of end your commentary there. And that should be enough.
Right.
Whereas high school stats, honestly, I don't like bringing them up a whole lot because you got to take them with a huge grain of salt. It's like, who are they playing against? And we've seen some great guys stat wise show up at CU and they're not up to snuff. And so that's not the be all end all by any means. But when you're talking about IMG, it's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, one guy like I think I said six, but I think it's five guys on defense. But one guy I like is Mantrez Walker, who's been committed
Yeah,
for a long time. And you mentioned stats. If you look at his stats at Buford, they don't pop off the page, but he's a star for one of the top high schools. If not the country, at least in Georgia, obviously they're still playing. And so actually they play against. Doesn't he play against Juju this weekend?
he does.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's a guy that a three-star guy that I like what he does. I mean, his film kind of impresses me. I think he's one that you got to watch it inside linebacker in the future.
Yeah, if you go back through the last two seasons, that defense has given up just under 10 points per game as a
Yeah.
defense. So he is a guy that's he commands a defense. I love the way that our national recruiting analyst Andrew Ivins talks about Julian Lewis being a de facto point guard on offense.
Hmm.
I think Montrez Walker is kind of that as a defensive player coming in. He and Andre Hart have developed a pretty special relationship. That's the good thing that Colorado's staff has been in Boulder for a little bit of time is that they've had guys like Montrez Walker out a bunch of times. And
Hmm.
so he can kind of hit the ground running a little bit. It's not this getting to know period that
Yeah.
you have to do now because you've been recruiting them so long that you've gotten past all that surface level stuff. They're going to go right in. And I don't know what Montrez Walker's role is. It's a tough position to play right away, but he's certainly got the mindset to do it if he can come in and prove that he's up to snuff.
Yeah. So one other thing on these guys is that Coach Prime mentioned it, but with CU going to a bowl game, these guys that are early enrollees, once they're done with high school, I mean they got to finish up their classes and all that stuff and make sure they're done with high school football, but they can come and participate in some practices with the bus for the bowl. They can't play in the bowl, but what do you think of that? I mean that's a newer thing. Do you like that they can do it?
Well, because both practices are so much about development,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can game plan for just one opponent, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like
Uh-huh.
going back to like a camp mindset a little bit. You lock in on that maybe 8 days before, but yeah, being able to bridge that gap a little bit. It's crazy. I like the parent in me goes that like these kids now don't get a senior year of high school, and it's kind of a bummer they can't, go to prom and just be a
Right.
kid.
Right.
But if you're a Colorado fan, you love it. Get them on campus and get them rolling because it has helped. We've seen with guys like Michael Welch and guys just are much better prepared going into every other phase of it. Spring balls, summer workout, like when you got your feet wet already.
Well, yeah, actually, from the parent side of it, you're probably looking at, man, they're graduating early. I mean, it's tough. In the last couple of years, I've had kids graduate and they move on, and that's tough in itself. But no prom, all this stuff. They're going to graduate early, and now all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, they're not even going to be here for Christmas. They're going to be in San Antonio or San Diego, wherever, and they won't even be here for Christmas. So some of these guys, though, that the Buffs signed, they could potentially have three more football games, and so they might not. I mean, if some of these guys get to their state title game, they may not be able to join the bus for a practice until, really the last couple days before the bowl game. So they wouldn't even really be able to do a whole lot. But I would imagine that those guys would still, even after however many games they're playing, still want to like, oh yeah, I want to go get a taste of it. At least if I can do a walkthrough, and that's all I do. They want to do that, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's just kind of anything again that you can do to just kind of ease your way in. I think it
Yeah.
helps out a lot. But these kids are so much more mature coming in now. They seem a little bit more ready just for the challenges that are there. It still catches some of them by surprise, but I would say
Hmm.
generally these kids are more prepared. And maybe it's the coverage of them as recruits. I don't know. They
Yeah.
get a lot more exposure, but they are more college ready now than they were definitely when I first started this job.
Well, you talk about coming in early. Juju coming in, basically, he's graduating high school a year and a half early to be
Yeah.
here in January. So that's crazy. He'll be 16 years old. But any other thoughts on this class?
Well, it's the draft portion of Colorado's roster rebuild, and
Yep.
now we go into free agency, and now we're going into our third off season with Coach Prime at the helm, and kind of know what to expect. And I think feel like there's a little less angst about just kind of the process because now we know that it works. And if you were really paying attention to the talent that was coming in uh, through every one of these portal windows, you weren't really guessing or thinking that this wasn't going in the right direction. But now
Mhm.
you've got that proof of concept of going 9-3 and going to a bowl game. And so it's going to be really fun. I think it's going to be honestly on some level see you turning some guys away from the portal
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
of you only do still have so many spots and the scholarship limit is going to go up. But I don't think Coach Prime is the type of coach that's going to want to have 105 scholarship guys on a team because
Right.
he's always kind of, I think, like the fact that when you look at this year's team and even last year's to an extent, is that the guys that were on the roster for the most part had some type of role at some point
Yep.
during the season. And when you have guys that don't have a role, I don't think your locker room is quite as healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we even talked to him about that during the season that there were so many guys that would come in and play a little role here and there. And I think that keeps the locker room engaged. And, that staff has been really good about um, giving some of those guys that we don't talk about a whole lot a role and kind of pumping up the role that they have. A guy like Brendan Gant, they made sure to talk about him at times and say, man, the great job he's doing on special teams, or Ben Finnisseth, who you mentioned before, and there's some other guys on special teams, but even like a Colton Hood, it's like, no, you're not going to start, but you got a role here. We're going to make sure you get on the field, and Carter Stoutmeyer, guys like that. So it will be interesting to see how they build this roster, and it'll be obviously there's going to be a lot of spots. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are leaving, and so there's going to be a lot of spots open. So it'll be an interesting process to watch this build.
You had a chance to talk to Rick George today. We got to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, and Buff fans obviously have been waiting. All right, where's this contract extension for Coach Prime? And I asked Rick George about that, and I said I get asked that a lot, and he goes, "Yeah, so do I." And so I said, "Well, what's the deal with that?" And he's not going to tell you a whole lot, but he did say that they've talked about it 3 times, and that they'll continue to talk about it after the season. He did reiterate to me that that's. He goes, Coach Prime. He goes, he doesn't want to be distracted with that type of thing during the season, and so he thinks that'll kind of ramp up more when the season gets over. But it looks like there could be an extension coming up soon, and he's got 3 years left on the deal. But I think we all know that he's certainly been well worth the deal, and maybe underpaid based on what he's done at Colorado so far.
Yeah, I don't think that Colorado fans need to worry too much about that because Coach Prime's different in the sense that
Hmm.
he's going to be taken care of financially, and he's going to get a huge pay increase, you would think.
Yeah,
Uh, but money is not the driving factor for him because he
yeah,
can make money whether he's coaching the Colorado Buffaloes or not. So,
yeah,
yeah, I that part of it, I've seen a little bit of that angst kind of building just a little bit because people are excited. They
yeah.
want to, I think, just kind of celebrate a contract extension. But I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it right now.
I wouldn't either because he can go hang out with Nick Saban and a duck for a weekend and make a lot of money doing a few half-life commercials. So he'll be fine. And by the way, looking at his contract, he has made about $600,000 in bonuses so far. For he had one bonus for hitting 6 wins, and then it was like $100,000 every regular season win after that. And then I believe it's $150,000 bonus for getting to the bowl game. So yeah, an extra 600 grand, which his kids have been very public about on social media about who's going to get those. And what is there, 5 kids?
Yeah.
5 kids, yeah, 5 kids.
Well, Travis Hunter, so six.
So yeah, Travis has got to claim his part too. So 600 grand, and there you go, 100 grand a kid. So maybe that's where that money goes. But yeah, that's a good thing. And one other nugget from that conversation though was, um, my colleague Pat Rooney in 2023, the summer of 2023, when Rick George was coming up on his 10-year anniversary, his contract runs through June of 26. And he told Pat, he's like, I'm not planning on working past that. And that was kind of his point of moving on. Well, he told me when I talked to him, he said, I'm not quite ready to say that I'm done in 2 years. And the big reason why is Coach Prime. And he said, frankly, I said, well, what changed? And he said, well, winning is fun. And, the relationship I have with Coach Prime, he goes, we have a really good relationship. And he goes, that's a factor for sure with how they work together. And so, um, he didn't say this, but I know he's never had this type of working relationship with a head coach that he's had, a football head coach that he's had there. And I think he had solid relationships with others, but not quite like this. And they're on the same page, he and Coach Prime. And I think that's rejuvenated Rick a little bit, to where I think as long as Coach Prime is here, Rick will be here. And I think people ought to take that as a good sign too, that if Rick's looking at being past 2026, that means there's some confidence there that Coach Prime would be as well.
That'd be huge news for Colorado. At some point, they're going to have to go to a new era in terms of the AD, but
Yeah.
Rick George, couldn't get that football coaching hire right.
Yeah,
And that was really the main thing that people had a bone to pick with him, because he's just handled that job so well over his tenure. And you could even say, he kind of hit on Mel Tucker because he got stole away from Michigan State for, what did they pay him, like $95 million, which
right.
he won't get all of that. And obviously that's a whole other story. But um, he's come a long way, I guess,
Yeah,
from the Carl Jarrell hire, I guess is what you would say, because he is revered, and he should be, because
yeah,
just even the way he treats people, Brian, like he's a good dude. And like,
yeah.
uh, it doesn't take long to be around Rick to understand that he gets it. And he's had so many different roles in his life, professional life, that have prepared him to be a great AD. And it's going to be big shoes to fill whenever they have to fill them.
Well, and if anybody watches any of the videos of him over the years on the sidelines of football games, or if you've ever gone to a basketball game and seen him in the stands, you know he loves winning and that he's a competitive guy.
Yeah.
Because he's very animated sometimes in the stands. And we remember, I mean, one of the more famous videos of him was Laviska Shenault with that touchdown against, I think it was USC, right? And it was the long run. It was like the wide receiver screen, I believe it was, and Laviska 50 some yards or whatever it was, and right into the arms of Rick George in the back of the end zone. And so, yeah, Rick is competitive and loves to win. And so, probably no surprise that now that things are going this well, he's like, maybe I'll stay. This is kind of fun.
When you have great synergy in that champion center, I think it makes showing up to work a lot more fun. And
Yeah.
that's, I think you kind of see that trickle down, from the athletic director to other departments. And it's a good time to be a CU Buffs fan right now.
Well, and look, I know I've known Rick fairly well in the time that he's been here, and um, I'll speak for him. Just from my observation, it was a drain for a few years before Coach Prime got here, and not just football wise, but I think COVID that was so hard on ads all around the country that it's almost surprising more didn't quit, because that was such a drain for so many of them to get through it. But you add that to the fact that the football team was not good at all, coming out of that, and I think that was a drain, and it probably again, I'm speaking for him, but I would imagine that lost some passion a little bit. Like, why am I doing this? This is just, it's hard, and it was a really difficult time, but winning cures a lot of things. And so when you're 9-3 and you're going to the Alamo Bowl, and well, we think we don't know yet. I'm going to speculate Alamo Bowl, but when you're going to a nice bowl game, things are looking pretty good.
One last thing to throw out there with Rick George is that he's always been fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
That's something that some of the previous athletic directors at CU weren't known for being. And
Yeah.
so he came in and he cleaned up that part of it really quick. And then the fundraising efforts to get basically a castle built up by Folsom Field and the indoor practice facility. It's been a few years now, so you kind of forget about kind of the charge he was on early on in terms of getting all that stuff built. And now you're going to be going into this different phase of college football where, in essence, you're going to be paying these players a
Hmm.
certain amount. I think having an athletic director that has the experience that Rick George does, he was on the NIL subcommittees, creating all these guardrails before it ever became a thing. The NCAA decided to punt on that. I know that frustrated Rick,
Yeah.
but he's been on these different committees. Like, he is just well versed in this stuff now. He even admits they were a little late themselves to the collective part of it, but he now, I think, is in a great place to keep
Hmm.
Colorado from avoiding any type of financial ruin that, honestly, when this gets flipped over, there's going to be a lot of stories about athletic departments that are in a heap of mess in terms of the economic side of things. And that's another reason I think you'd feel really good with Rick George in charge, kind of going into this next era.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and certainly some challenges when it comes to paying players, things like that. And we all know something I've been asking him for years about that west side of the stadium. Clearly not, needs, that's probably the next thing that needs renovation. The event center, is kind of outdated. So there's certainly some things, and that they've got to raise more money for. But he's been a great AD for the Buffs, and so probably a good thing. I would imagine a lot of Buff fans would be excited to see him here past 2026, and beyond. And if he and Coach Prime are still here in the football season at 26, 27, they're gonna be happy.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah,
Yeah. So a week from now, Brian, we're going to be in New York. You looking
I know.
forward to that?
I am. I've been to New York City 3 times. I've never stayed a night there. I've always been there like real quick day trips, and twice were for baseball games. One a Mets game, the Rockies' very first game in '93, and then a Yankees game. I had to go there before the old stadium was torn down. And then once my wife and I made a day trip there. We were out on the East Coast and spent one day in New York City. Never spent a night there, but finally will next weekend. So that'll be a lot of fun. And the other thing I was telling somebody, I feel like a real college football writer. I get to cover a Heisman Trophy, bowl games, and we're so used to once the final game 12 happens, like, all right, well, it's basketball season now, and there's not a whole lot after that. But so I feel like a real college football writer now.
Yeah, 25 months ago, had I told you, Brian, you're going to be going to New York to cover the Heisman, your mind might have gone to, am I going to be covering another team?
Right. So wait, I'm covering Alabama now. What?
No, it's pretty awesome, and thanks to Travis Hunter for allowing us to be able to do this. It's been
Right.
an absolute pleasure watching him play football for the Buffs the last couple of years. It's hard to put into words. That's been the hardest part of covering him. It's like you can say he's a unicorn. Well, everybody else says that. Like you want to think of something original, but
Yeah.
it's really just it's hard to put into words how incredible an athlete he is. And so to see him up there in Times Square for the, was that like an advertisement for the Heisman?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I mean,
crazy,
that's
isn't it?
pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we may need to co-thank Shador Sanders because there's a real possibility he'll be one of the 4 finalists as well. So
Yeah.
uh, I mean, to think that all these years we've been covering it, and there's been nobody even close. I mean, Laviska in 2018 was it? For the first 5, 6 weeks was very much in the conversation for the Heisman. Then he had the toe injury, and the last half of the season obviously was injured, and was no longer in the discussion. So it was never. We never got into November even with anybody saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to cover a Heisman." So to have two potentially in New York would be insane. Colorado's never had it, and there's only been a few times that that's happened. I mean, I think that would be the ninth time since they started inviting finalists in '82 that teammates would be there. So we don't know if it's going to happen yet. We'll find out on Monday, but that would be pretty darn cool.
Yeah, no doubt. I would have been enjoyed if I could just transport to a different time to go to when Byron Whizzer White was one of the finalists. They probably didn't do it back in New York back then, huh?
No, it was not the same deal.
Okay,
uh,
so never mind.
yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, I think that was the second. I think the Heisman started in '36 and Whizzer was
Okay.
in
Okay.
'37. So
Okay.
I think that it was one of the first Heisman trophies. And so it wasn't I mean, it was a big deal, but it wasn't the New York ceremony that it is now. But it still would have been fun to cover Whizzer White. I'll tell you, I don't know if I've said this on one of our shows before, but when I did an interview with Peggy a few weeks ago, um, she grew up, her introduction to the Buffs was listening to the radio broadcasts of the Buffs, and Whizzer White was one of the players for the Buffs. And so, Whizzer, he was Travis Hunter before Travis Hunter,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I mean, he was Hunter the other day became the first Buff since Whizzer White in 1937 to have over 1,000 yards of offense and 4 interceptions on defense. So there's my stat of the day. But Whizzer was also their punter. He had like 3 punt return touchdowns that year. He was their kick returner. He might have
He played other sports too.
Yeah, he was a 400 hitter in baseball. I think he was class president. He played basketball. All those things. But I asked her. I said, "So who was better?" She goes, "Oh, don't ask me that." so I couldn't get an answer out of Peggy on who was better. And in her defense, she listened to Whizzer White and didn't watch him. So I'll give her a pass on that. But you're a true Buff fan when you rooted for Whizzer White and Travis Hunter. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty amazing. I can't wait for all the pictures of her getting on the private jet to go
Yeah.
out to the bowl game. That's
I
going to
did
be
see
fun.
her at she goes to she's known for being a football fan, but they've watched everything for years, and so she's been in a lot of the women's basketball games, and she went even on Tuesday night when they played Tennessee Tech, the women. So she was there rooting the Buffs, and she's one of the last people out of the building, and so I see her and go up and say hi to her, and you have to get real close because she can't see real well. But I asked her about the bowl game, so I said, she goes, "Well, where do you think we're going?" And I said, "Well, it looks like probably San Antonio or San Diego." I said, "Are you still planning on going?" She goes, "Yes, I'm planning on going." I said, "You excited about San Antonio?" She goes, "Whatever they give us." So she's excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it'll be fun, and we're gonna find all that out on Sunday, and so we'll probably do another analysis video once we find all that out.
Perfect.
Sunday, is when the bowl announcement will come. Monday is when the Heisman Trophy finalists are announced, and so yeah, we have no access this week or next week, but we're incredibly busy with a lot of things going on, so that makes it exciting. If you're not gonna have access for 2 weeks, these are the 2 weeks to do it because there's plenty of other stuff to keep us busy.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's always never a dull moment covering the Buffs, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. Adam, have a great weekend, and we'll chat with you next week as we get prepared to go to New York.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian.